A lonely woman found an abandoned pregnant dog during a storm and hesitantly decided to take her in. When the puppies were born, she wept uncontrollably. Secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever in a way no one could have predicted. A story of overcoming, starting over, and unconditional love. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment from wherever you're watching. The air in Savannah smelled of petrichor that October afternoon. Esmeralda Hayes paused in front of the old Victorian on Jasmine Lane, observing how time had transformed what was once the pride of the neighborhood into a faded building with an overgrown yard. At 68, her silver hair pulled back in a simple bun, a grocery bag hanging from her arm. She clutched an antique key that felt heavier with memories than with metal. "Now or never," she murmured, adjusting her glasses. The floral dress she wore had been her favorite when Richard, her husband, was still by her side. 5 years had passed since he'd left her after a long illness, leaving her alone in her small apartment in Atlanta, surrounded by silence and empty routines. The screech of the front gate sounded like a rusty complaint. A flock of pigeons took flight from the trees, startled by the unexpected visitor. Esmeralda walked down the stone path, where weeds had conquered every available crack. The scent of wild jasmine mingled with fallen leaves, creating a fragrance that instantly transported her to her childhood. It had been almost 10 years since she'd set foot in this place. 10 years since she'd vowed never to return after a terrible argument with her sister Margaret. And now Notary Public Javier Diaz had appeared at her door with a sealed envelope, and the news that would change everything. "The house and its contents belong to you, Esmeralda. That's what your sister stipulated before her passing." The lock protested at the key, as if it too was reluctant to allow the past to be disturbed. When it finally gave way, Esmeralda pushed open the heavy carved wooden door and stepped into the dimness. The air smelled of confinement and sleeping memories. Her fingers found the light switch, and the yellowish light revealed the hallway exactly as she remembered it. The mahogany furniture covered with white sheets, the grandfather clock stopped at 3:27, the family photographs on the walls. It was as if time had frozen, patiently awaiting her return. A soft noise from the kitchen startled her. Her heart quickened as she clutched the handle of her bag, preparing to flee if necessary. "Who's there?" she asked, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. "A meow," was the answer. From the kitchen doorway appeared a tabby cat with a white star-shaped patch on its chest. Its amber eyes observed Esmeralda with a mixture of curiosity and dignity. "And who might you be?" Esmeralda asked, feeling a wave of relief. "How did you get in here, little one?" The cat tilted its head slightly, as if evaluating the question, and then gracefully walked towards the kitchen. At the entrance, it stopped to look at her, as if inviting her to follow. The kitchen, unlike the rest of the house, was surprisingly clean. On the tile-covered counter was a plate with leftover food and a bowl of fresh water. Someone had been taking care of the animal. "Seems like you have someone looking after you," Esmeralda murmured, watching the cat rub against her ankles. That's when she noticed the yellowish envelope on the counter, her name written in Margaret's unmistakable handwriting. A chill ran down her spine, and she had to lean against the counter to keep her balance. The letter was there waiting for her, as if her sister had known exactly when she would arrive. With trembling fingers, Esmeralda opened the envelope. Inside, she found a small gold key and a handwritten note. "Not everything that seems lost is truly forgotten. Look in the place where we kept our childhood secrets. Tlaloc knows the way." Esmeralda looked at the cat, which had now sat elegantly by the back door leading to the patio, its eyes fixed on her as if containing all the secrets of the universe. "So you're Tlaloc?" she asked, remembering the Aztec god of rain. What did Margaret want her to find? And after so much silence, after so many years of resentment and distance, why had her sister brought her back to the house of memories Esmeralda had spent so long trying to forget? The cat meowed softly, as if reminding her that some questions only find answers when we are ready to hear them, and perhaps, after a decade of avoiding confronting the past, Esmeralda was finally ready. The first rays of sun filtered through the lace curtains, drawing golden patterns on the wooden floor. Esmeralda woke up disoriented in the old guest room, where she had decided to spend the night after hours exploring the house. It had been strange to sleep under that roof again, lulled only by the silence and the occasional meows of Tlaloc, who seemed to have decided that his place was on the armchair by the window. Sitting up in bed, She watched the cat looking at her with narrowed eyes. "You're quite the mystery, you know," she murmured as she ran her fingers through her silver hair. Her joints protested as she got up. At 68, her body was beginning to remind her of its limitations, especially after sleeping on a different mattress than usual. But there was something heavier than age that morning: the memories. The night before, after finding Margaret's note, Esmeralda had wandered through the rooms like a sleepwalker, touching objects, opening drawers, reliving fragments of a shared life she had tried to erase. Each door opened, each room visited, awakened memories like frightened birds from a disturbed nest. Breakfast was a simple meal improvised with what she found in the surprisingly well-stocked pantry, another sign that someone regularly cared for the place. As the water for chamomile tea boiled on the old stove, Esmeralda felt the familiar aroma fill the kitchen, bringing with it the vivid image of Margaret making coffee on Sunday mornings, humming a song by Ella Fitzgerald. "We were so close," she whispered to the empty kitchen, "until we weren't." Tlaloc, watching her from the windowsill, meowed as if in agreement. With the steaming mug in her hands, Esmeralda decided it was time to face the challenge left by her sister. "Look in the place where we kept our childhood secrets," the note said. Esmeralda knew exactly what place Margaret was referring to. The attic had always been the private kingdom of the Hayes sisters during their childhood. Hidden under the sloping roof of red tiles, that space had become their secret refuge, away from their parents' watchful eyes and the outside world. There, among old trunks and forgotten furniture, they had built a parallel universe of invented stories and whispered promises. The attic stairs creaked under her weight, each step a step closer to the past. Dust danced in the rays of sun that entered through the small round window, creating a golden path in the air. Esmeralda felt her heart quickening as she reached the last step. The attic was different from how she remembered it, more organized, as if someone had spent a lot of time there. There were bookshelves with neatly arranged books, a reading chair next to a coffee table, and several trunks arranged in a pattern that seemed almost intentional. That's when she noticed the old cedar trunk in the farthest corner. She recognized it immediately. It was where she and Margaret kept their treasures during childhood: precious little finds, seashells from Myrtle Beach, secret notes, diaries with padlocks, special photographs, and dreams written on scraps of paper. Esmeralda walked slowly to the trunk, kneeling with difficulty in front of it. The small gold key from Margaret's letter fit perfectly into the rusty lock. Inside the trunk, carefully organized, was a photo album Esmeralda had never seen before. On the cover, a single handwritten word: "Apologies." With trembling hands, Esmeralda opened the album. The first page contained a single photograph: two little girls holding hands in front of the Victorian house. She and Margaret, perhaps 8 and 10 years old. Below, her sister's elegant handwriting simply said, "The beginning doesn't change. What changes is how we choose to remember." Turning the pages, Esmeralda found a meticulous documentation of moments shared between the sisters over the years: birthdays, graduations, weddings. Many of these photos Esmeralda had never seen. Some evoked memories so vivid that she could almost feel the aromas and hear the sounds of those moments. In the middle of the album, Esmeralda stopped, stunned. There was a photograph of the fateful day, the day of the great rift between the sisters. In the image, captured by some unsuspecting guest, she and Margaret were next to each other at Esmeralda's 60th birthday party, smiling as if nothing was wrong. Hours later, bitter words would be exchanged, accusations launched like arrows, and a chasm would open between them. The caption written by Margaret read, "The last day we were us, before the misunderstanding became truth." Misunderstanding. Esmeralda felt a wave of confusion and anger. The rift hadn't been a misunderstanding. Margaret had sold their family vacation home in Hilton Head without consulting her, the house where so many childhood memories had been forged. How could she call that a misunderstanding? Continuing with the album, Esmeralda found on the penultimate page something that left her frozen: a series of carefully preserved documents, sales contracts, bank transfer receipts, and a letter from a hospital. Her vision blurred as she understood what she was seeing. Margaret hadn't sold the Hilton Head house out of greed, as Esmeralda had always believed. She had sold it to pay for Richard's experimental treatment when he was diagnosed with a serious illness. A treatment that had given him 2 more years of life, and which Esmeralda always believed had been covered by health insurance. A sticky note on the edge of the page simply said, He made me promise not to tell you. He said you wouldn't accept the help. Tears began to fall before Esmeralda could stop them, staining the last page of the album, which was blank except for a sentence in the center. Now you know. What will you do with this truth? A movement on the stairs made Esmeralda raise her head. Tlaloc was there, watching her with his enigmatic eyes. Behind him, a shadow moved, and the sound of footsteps echoed on the old wood. Someone was coming up to the attic. Esmeralda quickly closed the album and stood up, wiping her tears with the back of her hands. Her heart pounded in her throat as she stared at the attic stairs, from where the footsteps were coming. Tlaloc remained seated on the last step, calm as if waiting for the arrival of an old friend. "Hello, is anyone there?" Esmeralda called, her voice betraying her anxiety. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs. She appeared to be in her 40s, with brown hair pulled back in a messy bun and penetrating green eyes that reminded her of someone Esmeralda couldn't immediately identify. She wore simple clothes, jeans, a white t-shirt, and a navy blue knit sweater. In her hands she held a grocery bag. "Esmeralda, I'm sorry if I scared you," the woman said with a shy smile. "I'm Carmen Reyes. I took care of Margaret." Esmeralda was paralyzed, the photo album still pressed against her chest like a shield. "How did you get in here?" she asked, distrust evident in her voice. Carmen held up a key. "I've come 3 times a week to take care of the house and Tlaloc since Margaret got sick." Her eyes briefly strayed to the floor. "She asked me to continue until you came." "Did she know I was coming?" Esmeralda asked, confused. "She was sure," Carmen confirmed with a small smile. "She said some circles need to be closed, no matter how long it takes." An uncomfortable silence hung between them. Tlaloc, apparently tired of the tension, walked to Carmen and rubbed against her legs, receiving an automatic caress. "I brought some groceries." Carmen broke the silence, lifting the bag. "I figured you'd need fresh food if you plan to stay." "I haven't decided how long I'll stay," Esmeralda replied, more sharply than she intended. Carmen's eyes fell on the album Esmeralda was holding. "Oh, I see you found her gift. Did you know about this?" Esmeralda asked, suddenly alert. Carmen nodded. "Margaret worked on that album for the last year. She called it her redemption project." She paused, as if carefully considering her next words. "She had many regrets, Esmeralda, mainly about the silence between you." Esmeralda felt the weight of those words like stones in her stomach. Suddenly, she needed to sit down. She returned to the reading chair in the corner of the attic, the album still firmly in her hands. "Why did you stay?" she finally asked. "After she got sick, why did you keep taking care of this place?" Carmen approached, placing the bag on the floor. "At first, out of respect. Then, out of hope, I think." She smiled softly. "And also because I promised." "Promises," Esmeralda murmured, thinking of the unspoken promises between her and her sister, the ones that were broken and the ones that never had a chance to be made. "Margaret left something else for you," Carmen said after a moment. "It's in her studio when you're ready." Margaret's painting studio had been her sanctuary. Even in childhood, when they shared almost everything, that was the only space Margaret kept exclusively hers. Esmeralda hadn't entered there the night before. The closed door represented a boundary she wasn't yet ready to cross. "Did she paint again, then?" Esmeralda asked, surprised. Margaret had abandoned her brushes decades ago, after the death of their parents. "Every day for the last year," Carmen confirmed. "She said she was making up for lost time." She hesitated, then continued. "Esmeralda, there's something you should know about Margaret's last year." The serious tone in Carmen's voice made Esmeralda look up from the album. "She knew she was sick," Carmen said softly. "Very sick. The doctors gave her 6 months, but she fought for almost a year. She said she had one last project to complete." Esmeralda felt as if the air had been sucked out of the attic. Margaret sick, dying slowly while creating this album of shared memories. The idea was unbearable. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "She didn't allow it," Carmen replied simply. "She said you were both too stubborn, and that if you found out about the illness, you would come out of obligation, not choice. And she needed it to be a choice." Esmeralda closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 8 years of stubborn silence. 8 years that could have been different. When she opened her eyes again, she saw that Carmen was watching her with an expression that seemed strangely familiar. "Your eyes," Esmeralda said suddenly. "They remind me of my mother," Carmen completed with a small smile. "Dolores Reyes." She worked at your family's vacation home in Hilton Head. The revelation hit Esmeralda like lightning. Dolores, the housekeeper who had practically raised them during the summers. The woman whose gentle advice had guided the Hayes sisters through turbulent adolescence. "You're Dolores' daughter," Esmeralda whispered, vaguely remembering a shy girl who sometimes accompanied her mother. "But how?" "Margaret found me about 5 years ago," Carmen explained, "after my mother passed away. She said she was trying to reconnect with important people from the past." Carmen paused significantly. "I think she was rehearsing for the reconciliation that really mattered." Esmeralda felt the album weigh down on her lap, as if it were made of lead, each page a testament to lost opportunities and unspoken truths. "There's a letter for you," Carmen finally said. "In the studio." She wrote it on her last day of lucidity. Tlaloc, who had been observing the conversation from the doorway, slowly walked to Esmeralda and jumped onto her lap, settling down on the album as if he wanted to protect her from the weight of the revelations. "He never does that with strangers," Carmen commented, surprised. Esmeralda stroked the cat's soft fur, finding comfort in its warmth. "Maybe he doesn't consider me a stranger? Or maybe he knows something we don't," Carmen suggested with an enigmatic smile. "Margaret used to say that Tlaloc had the soul of a guardian, that he could see through time." At that moment, as if understanding that they were talking about him, Tlaloc raised his head and meowed softly, his amber eyes fixed on Esmeralda with an almost supernatural intensity. "I'll prepare something to eat," Carmen said, breaking the spell of the moment. "You must be hungry. Then maybe you'll be ready to visit the studio." When Carmen went downstairs with the grocery bag, Esmeralda remained seated, stroking Tlaloc and contemplating the turns the morning had brought. The album on her lap contained truths that defied 8 years of carefully cultivated resentment, and now Margaret's studio waited, holding a final message from a sister who had fallen ill trying to build a bridge over the chasm that separated them. Esmeralda looked towards the round attic window, where the midday light created golden patterns on the dusty floor. Somewhere in the house, she could hear Carmen moving around in the kitchen, bringing life to a space that had been dormant for a long time. "What should I do, Tlaloc?" she whispered to the cat. "How can I forgive not only her but myself?" Tlaloc blinked slowly, as if the answer were too obvious to be spoken. Then, with graceful determination, he jumped from her lap and walked to the stairs, pausing to look back, inviting her to follow. It was time to visit the studio. The second-floor hallway seemed longer than Esmeralda remembered, each step towards Margaret's studio demanding more courage than the last. The floorboards creaked softly under her feet, as if the house were conversing with her, telling stories of days gone by. Tlaloc walked in front of her with feline confidence, his tail held high like a flag, guiding her through a minefield of memories. The aroma of pozole being prepared rose from the kitchen, where Carmen was working, bringing a strange sense of normalcy to a day that had nothing normal about it. The studio door was at the end of the hallway, a simple white-painted wooden door with nothing to indicate the importance of what lay beyond. Esmeralda stopped in front of the entrance, her hand resting on the cold knob. Tlaloc sat patiently beside her, as if understanding the magnitude of the moment. "I'm being ridiculous," Esmeralda murmured to herself. "It's just a room." But it wasn't just a room, and she knew it. It was Margaret's sacred space, the only place in the house that had always been exclusively hers. On the rare occasions when Esmeralda had entered there in the past, she had always felt like an intruder. With a deep sigh, she turned the knob and pushed open the door. The light that flooded her eyes was almost blinding. Unlike the rest of the house, with its heavy curtains and somber atmosphere, the studio was bathed in the clarity coming through large, east-facing windows. The walls, once clinically white, were now covered with an explosion of colors. Dozens of canvases arranged side by side, some hung, others leaning against the floor. In the center of the room, a large easel held a canvas covered with a white cloth. Next to it, a meticulously organized work table, clean brushes in glass containers, paint tubes arranged by color, clean palettes waiting to be used. Esmeralda entered slowly, turning in a circle to absorb the transformation of the space. The paintings on the walls told a story. The story of Margaret rediscovering her passion, her technique visibly evolving from one canvas to the next. The first works were hesitant, with shy brushstrokes and contained colors. The most recent ones exploded with confidence and emotion. But it was the subject of the paintings that made Esmeralda bring her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Each painting depicted a shared memory between the sisters. There was the Myrtle Beach, where they spent their childhood summers, with the two of them running on the sand. Further on, the picnic in their parents' garden, with the teenage sisters reading books in the shade of a mango tree. Esmeralda's quinceañera, with Margaret helping her fix her hair. Esmeralda's wedding to Richard, where Margaret had been the maid of honor. So many moments, so many memories, all preserved with brushstrokes full of love and, Esmeralda now perceived, longing. "Oh, Margaret," she whispered, walking slowly among the canvases as if she were in a gallery of her own life. It was then that she noticed a particular series of paintings, arranged in chronological sequence on an entire wall. They depicted the vacation home in Hilton Head, the same house whose sale had caused the rift between the sisters. The first showed the house as it was decades ago, full and vibrant. The following ones showed it aging, with less life in each painting. In the penultimate one, the house was visibly deteriorated, almost abandoned. The last painting in the series, however, was different. It showed the same house but completely renovated, with a young couple and two small children in the garden. In the lower corner, there was a sign written in small letters, Esperanza Foundation, Support Center for Children with Chronic Illnesses. Esmeralda approached, her eyes wide with amazement. Could it be possible? She desperately searched for a date on the painting, finding it hidden in the signature, 3 months ago. Tlaloc gracefully jumped onto the windowsill, drawing her attention to an envelope placed there. It was a simple envelope, with her name written in Margaret's elegant handwriting. With trembling fingers, Esmeralda opened it. Inside was a letter and a small key different from the first. "Dear Esmeralda, if you're reading this, it means you finally found your way back home, and that I'm no longer here to greet you. There's so much to say, and now, ironically, so little time. First, about the Hilton Head house. I never had the chance to explain, or maybe I didn't have the courage. I sold it to pay for Richard's experimental treatment. The doctors had given him 6 months, but with that new therapy in Houston, he gained 2 years. 2 years you were able to share. The insurance refused to cover it, and Richard begged me not to tell you. He said you would refuse, that you wouldn't accept charity, even from your sister. Maybe he was right. We were both too proud. The money from the sale was more than enough for the treatment. With the rest, I made a donation to transform the property into a support center for children with chronic illnesses. Visit it someday. I think you would be proud of what that old house has become. Some things need to die to be reborn with a greater purpose. Second, about Carmen. She's more than she seems. Dolores, her mother, confided a secret to me many years ago. Carmen isn't just Dolores's daughter. She's also our father's daughter, a half-sister we never officially knew. Dad never knew. It was Dolores's decision not to tell. But look at her eyes, Esmeralda. They are his eyes. They are our eyes. I found Carmen by chance 5 years ago when she was working as a nurse at the hospital, where I had my first exams. Her last name intrigued me, and when I saw her eyes, I knew instantly. We've talked a lot since then. She's extraordinary, Esmeralda. A part of our family we never knew we needed. I hope you'll let her be for you what she became for me. A connection to who we were and a bridge to who we can be. Finally, about us. My biggest regret was letting pride build a wall so high between us that neither could climb it for 8 long years. Time that won't come back. But maybe there's still time for you to forgive, to understand, to accept that sometimes we make the wrong decisions for the right reasons. Under the cloth on the easel is my last work, my final gift to you. The key in this envelope opens the blue trunk in the corner of the studio. What's inside is yours by right. It always was. Remember, dear sister, forgiveness isn't something we grant to others. It's a gift we give ourselves. With eternal love, Margaret. Esmeralda read the letter twice, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. When she finally looked up, her eyes fell on the covered canvas. With hesitant steps, she approached the easel and, after a moment of hesitation, removed the white cloth. The gasp that escaped her lips echoed in the silent room. It wasn't a painting that Margaret had left as her final work, but an ornate mirror with a beautifully hand-painted frame. The frame was decorated with small scenes of their shared life, fragments of memories captured with delicate and precise brushstrokes. At the top of the mirror, painted in gold letters, were the words, "To see clearly what has always been there." Esmeralda looked at herself in the mirror, seeing not only her current reflection, the face lined with wrinkles, the eyes reddened by tears, but also the girl she had been, the young woman she had dreamed of, the woman she had become. And in each version of herself, she could see traces of Margaret, as if both were inseparable parts of a whole. With a pounding heart, Esmeralda went to the blue trunk in the corner. The key fit perfectly, and upon opening the lid, she found dozens of letters tied with colored ribbons. Each envelope had a date written on it, all corresponding to the 8 years of separation. Margaret had written to her regularly, although she had never sent the letters. Under the pile of unsent correspondence was a sketchbook and a new set of watercolors, along with a simple note: "It's never too late to start over. Your talent was always greater than mine." Esmeralda sat on the floor, her body suddenly too heavy to stand. Tlaloc approached silently and settled down beside her, as if offering support. In the distance, she heard Carmen calling her to eat, but she couldn't move. Not yet. She opened the first letter in the pile. It was dated just a week after their big fight. "Dear Esmeralda, today I tried to call you 3 times. Each time I hung up before the first ring. What could I say that would change anything? Words seem so inadequate when the damage is already done. But I feel that if I don't write it down, my heart will simply break from the pressure. It was just the beginning of a long journey towards the truth, a path of reconciliation that Margaret had meticulously prepared for her. And a gift that transcended illness, distance, and time. However, what hurt the most wasn't what she had found in the studio, but the certainty that it was now too late for a reconciliation in person. Or maybe not. Maybe this was exactly the kind of reconciliation Margaret had envisioned, one that occurred in the heart, in the belated but profound understanding that love had never disappeared, only hidden behind the veil of pride. "Lunch is ready, Esmeralda." Carmen's soft voice came from the door. Her eyes, the eyes of the Hayes family, fell on the scattered letters, but she didn't ask anything. "Thank you, Carmen. I'll be down in a moment," Esmeralda replied, surprised by the calmness in her own voice. When Carmen left, Esmeralda looked at the mirror again. For a moment, she thought she saw Margaret's reflection next to hers, smiling with that smile that always meant, "I told you so." "You were right, Margaret," Esmeralda whispered. "It's never too late." Carefully, she returned the letters to the trunk. There would be time to read them all. Now she had a whole house full of memories to rediscover, truths to accept, and perhaps a new sister to get to know. With Tlaloc faithfully following her, Esmeralda left the studio, leaving the door open for the first time in decades. It was time to let the light into all the corners darkened by resentment and time. The kitchen smelled of cumin, cilantro, and memories. Esmeralda stopped in the doorway, watching Carmen move with the familiarity of someone who knows every corner. The table was set for 2, with Talavera plates that Esmeralda recognized from her childhood. The pozole was steaming in a large bowl in the center, accompanied by small dishes with onions, radishes, and limes. "It's my mother's recipe," Carmen said, noticing Esmeralda's gaze. Margaret said it reminded her of Sundays in her childhood. Esmeralda nodded, unable to speak. Dolores had made pozole every Sunday during the summers in Hilton Head. It was a tradition as interwoven into her childhood as the jasmine blooming in spring. They sat in silence, the only sound the occasional meow of Tlaloc, who waited patiently by the table for any scraps that might fall. The first spoonful instantly transported Esmeralda to those golden summers. Laughter around the table, her father telling exaggerated stories, her mother feigning exasperation but smiling behind her napkin, Margaret and she exchanging knowing glances. "It's exactly as I remembered it," Esmeralda finally said, her voice choked with emotion. Carmen smiled, a smile so much like Dolores's that it was unsettling. "Mom taught me all her recipes before she left. She said cooking is the purest way to keep love alive. She was a very wise woman," Esmeralda replied, studying Carmen's face with new eyes, searching for and finding familiar features. The cheekbones were definitely from her unknown father, as was the slightly slanted shape of the eyes. "Now I can see it clearly." "See what?" Carmen asked, although her gaze indicated that she already knew the answer. "My father in you," Esmeralda said simply. "Us in you." Carmen looked down at her plate. "It took me years to accept it. Mom told me when I turned 18, she said Gabriel never knew, that it was her decision not to complicate things. My father would have adored you," Esmeralda said with certainty. "He always wanted more children, but my mother had complications after Margaret. Margaret said exactly the same thing," Carmen smiled, "and then she showed me all the family photographs, telling me stories for hours. She paused. It was like finally finding a piece of myself that I didn't know was missing. Esmeralda felt a pang of envy. Margaret had had 5 years to get to know this woman, to form a bond with her. 5 years that Esmeralda had lost because of her stubbornness. "Tell me about your life," she asked, determined not to waste any more time. And so, as the pozole cooled and the afternoon wore on, Carmen shared her story. She had studied nursing, married young to a teacher named Edward, and had 2 children, Gabriel, 16, and Sophia, 14. She had cared for her mother during her illness, and later, by a coincidence that seemed like fate, she had met Margaret when she arrived at the hospital where Carmen worked. "When I saw her last name on the chart, I was curious," Carmen explained. "But when I entered her room and saw her, it was like looking at an older version of the photographs my mother kept. I almost dropped the medication tray." Esmeralda smiled, imagining the scene. Margaret always had a gift for dramatic moments. "I asked her if she knew Dolores Reyes," Carmen continued. "You should have seen her face. She hugged me crying, right there, in the middle of her treatment. From that day on, I requested to be assigned to her case permanently." As she spoke, Carmen took out her phone and showed photographs of her children. Esmeralda felt a lump in her throat as she saw young Gabriel, who bore a striking resemblance to her unknown grandfather. "They're beautiful," she said sincerely. "I'd like to meet them." Margaret loved them, Carmen smiled. "They came every Sunday. Sophia played the piano for her, and Gabriel read her poetry. It was as if they had always been family." "They are," Esmeralda affirmed firmly. "They're our family." Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "Margaret said you'd say that. She said that, under all that stubbornness, you had the most generous heart in the Hayes family." Esmeralda let out a soft laugh. "She was always better at reading me than I was at reading myself." After lunch, Carmen showed Esmeralda the changes Margaret had made to the house over the past year. The library had been completely reorganized, with new shelves full of books on art and medicine. The back garden, which Esmeralda remembered as a neglected space, now housed a small herb garden and flowers. Margaret's old room had become a comfortable guest room where Carmen's children had slept during their visits. "She planned all this for when you came," Carmen explained as they walked through the garden. "She said that when you finally received the news of her illness, you would need a place that felt like a home, not a mausoleum of memories." "Always one step ahead," Esmeralda murmured, touching the petals of a marigold. "Even in this." As evening began to fall, Carmen made coffee and served it on the patio. They sat in silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tlaloc had settled on Esmeralda's lap, purring contentedly. "What will you do now?" Carmen finally asked. "With the house, with all this?" Esmeralda looked at the old Victorian she had avoided for so long, which now felt simultaneously familiar and new. She thought of the letters waiting to be read, of the paintings telling shared stories, of the blank canvas Margaret had left for her. "I think I'll stay a while," she said slowly. "There's a lot to process, a lot to rediscover." She looked at Carmen. "And a family to get to know better." Carmen nodded, a warm smile illuminating her face. "The kids will be thrilled. Sophia has been insisting on meeting her other great-aunt since Margaret told her about you." "Great-aunt?" Esmeralda raised an eyebrow. "You're making me feel ancient." Both laughed, and for a moment, Esmeralda felt as if an invisible weight lifted from her shoulders. Not everything was resolved. Not all wounds were healed, but she had taken the first step on a path that her sister had carefully laid out for her. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Esmeralda made a decision. She would visit the Esperanza Foundation in Hilton Head. She would see with her own eyes what her childhood home had become, fully understand her sister's sacrifice and vision. "Can I ask you something, Carmen?" she said, breaking the contemplative silence. "Of course. Do you think Margaret forgave me? Did she really forgive me for all these years of silence?" Carmen considered the question for a moment, absently stroking Tlaloc, who had moved to her lap. "I think there was never anything to forgive in her mind. She understood why you reacted the way you did. She always said that great passions produce great pains, but also great healings." Esmeralda nodded, letting the words settle. "Tomorrow, would you accompany me to Hilton Head?" I need to see the foundation." "Of course," Carmen replied. "It's a beautiful place. I think you'll be proud." As darkness finally enveloped the garden, the two women entered the house, carrying with them empty cups and new promises. That night, for the first time in many years, Esmeralda slept in her parents' old room, with Tlaloc curled at her feet and the stars shining through the open window. In her dreams, she walked through a garden full of blooming jasmine, with Margaret by her side, both young again, both laughing as they shared secrets under the blue sky of childhood. The drive to Hilton Head wound through hills and valleys, offering breathtaking views that took Esmeralda's breath away, even though she'd traveled this route countless times. Carmen's old Volkswagen moved at a steady pace, while Tlaloc watched the scenery from a carrier in the back seat, occasionally meowing as if commenting on the beauty of the panorama. Esmeralda kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to control the nervousness that grew as they approached their destination. She had spent the previous night reading some of Margaret's letters, each word a thread, slowly mending the broken fabric between them. Through tears and laughter, she had discovered facets of her sister she had never known: her fight against illness, her determination to leave a positive legacy, her tireless hope for reconciliation. "Almost there," Carmen announced, turning onto a street lined with bougainvillea. "It's at the end of this avenue." Esmeralda held her breath. She recognized this street, although it was significantly changed. The houses seemed newer, better maintained, and there were several businesses that didn't exist in her memories: a bakery, a bookstore, a small cafe with tables on the sidewalk. Then she saw it, the large colonial house that had been the setting for so many summers. The structure was still recognizable, but everything else had changed. The facade, once a faded cream color, now shone in a warm terracotta hue. The front yard, which in her memories was a shadowy space with a single flamboyant tree, was now full of color: jacarandas, bougainvillea, and dozens of flowers creating a living rainbow. A discreet but elegant sign announced, "Esperanza Foundation, Support Center for Children with Chronic Illnesses." "Margaret named it after you," Carmen said softly as she parked. "She said you were always the optimist of the two, even though you tried to hide it under that practical exterior." Esmeralda couldn't answer, emotion forming a lump in her throat. Her name in large decorative letters, honoring a project she didn't even know existed until a day ago. It was overwhelming. As they got out of the car, they were greeted by a young woman with a bright smile and a white coat over colorful casual clothes. "Carmen, so good to see you," she greeted warmly, before turning to Esmeralda with a mixture of reverence and excitement. "And you must be Esmeralda. It's an honor to finally meet you. I'm Dr. Lucy Miller, Medical Director of the Foundation." "The honor is mine," Esmeralda replied, shaking her hand. "Although I must confess that until yesterday I knew nothing about this place." Dr. Miller exchanged a knowing look with Carmen. Margaret explained the situation. "She warned us that one day an elegant lady with her same eyes and probably many questions would come." This drew a small laugh from Esmeralda. Margaret always had a gift for accurate descriptions. "Please allow me to show you the foundation," Lucy offered, guiding them towards the entrance. "The children are in class now, but you'll be able to meet some during lunch if you stay." The interior of the house had been completely renovated, but Esmeralda could recognize the basic structure beneath the modifications. The old main hall, where her mother used to host literary gatherings, was now a colorful library with low bookshelves filled with books and comfortable cushions scattered on the floor. In one corner, a group of volunteers were organizing materials for what appeared to be an art workshop. "We try to maintain as normal an environment as possible," Lucy explained as they toured the facilities. "Many of our children spend weeks or even months here during their treatments. They need education, play, art, music, all the experiences that any child deserves." The old family rooms had been converted into discreetly equipped medical spaces, therapy rooms, and colorful bedrooms for patients. The back garden, which Esmeralda remembered as a wild space where she and Margaret had built tree houses, now housed a small therapeutic garden, adapted play areas, and a palapa where outdoor activities apparently took place. "How many children do you currently care for?" Esmeralda asked, moved by the transformation. "We have capacity for 25 resident patients," Lucy replied, "and we serve another 50 on an outpatient basis. We specialize in cases of chronic illnesses that require prolonged treatment, but not necessarily constant hospitalization." As they walked down a hallway decorated with framed children's drawings, they came to a door that Esmeralda immediately recognized, the entrance to her father's old study. Her heart quickened, anticipating what she would find inside. Lucy opened the door, revealing a bright and welcoming office. The walls were covered with photographs, certificates, and awards. Behind the main desk, prominently displayed, hung a portrait of Margaret smiling serenely. The director's office, Lucy explained. Margaret personally oversaw every detail of the foundation until her health prevented her. After that, she continued advising us from Savannah. Esmeralda slowly approached her sister's portrait. It had been painted recently, perhaps in the last year. Margaret appeared with completely white hair, but her eyes shone with the same intensity that Esmeralda remembered from her youth. She never stopped believing in this project, Lucy continued, respectfully observing Esmeralda's emotion. Even in her last months, when she was already very weak, she kept sending ideas, reviewing plans for the expansion we plan to start next year. Expansion? Esmeralda asked, turning to her. Lucy nodded. We want to add a wing for teenagers and expand our art therapy programs. Margaret left funds specifically earmarked for that, but, well, now I suppose those decisions are up to you. Esmeralda felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had not only inherited a house full of memories in Savannah, but also this extraordinary legacy in Hilton Head, a legacy born from the same act that had caused her estrangement from Margaret. I'd like to see the plans, she finally said, and meet the children if possible. Lucy's smile widened. Of course. In fact, there's someone special I think you should meet. They were led to a small inner courtyard, where an 8-year-old girl with shiny black hair in 2 braids was playing the violin with absolute concentration. Despite the wheelchair she was sitting in, her posture was perfect, and the melody, Esmeralda recognized Happy Birthday, flowed with surprising fluency for someone so young. That's Hope, Lucy whispered with evident pride. She was the first patient we received when we opened 4 years ago. She had advanced stage leukemia, and the prognosis wasn't good. Today she's in remission and comes twice a week for her checkups and music lessons. Hope? Esmeralda repeated, feeling a surge of emotion. Margaret insisted on personally sponsoring her treatment and education, Carmen explained. She said that girl had your same eyes, determined and dreamy at the same time. When the little girl finished her piece, she looked up and noticed the group watching her. A radiant smile lit up her face as she recognized Carmen, but her expression turned curious when she saw Esmeralda. Are you the other Hayes? She asked directly, with the frankness characteristic of children. Margaret's sister? Esmeralda nodded, surprised. Yes, I am. How did you know? The girl pointed to her eyes. She said her sister had eyes like mine, eyes that could see music in the colors. Esmeralda felt her heart skip a beat. It was an expression her mother used to use, see music in the colors, to describe the peculiar way Esmeralda experienced the world as a child, a kind of synesthesia that Margaret had always found fascinating. She knelt beside the wheelchair, getting down to the little girl's level. It's an honor to meet you, Hope. You play beautifully. Margaret gave me this violin, the girl replied, stroking the instrument reverently. She said that when I was ready, I would meet someone who could teach me songs that aren't even written in sheet music. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation. Are you her? Can you teach me those songs? Esmeralda felt tears welling up in her eyes. Margaret remembered that she had studied music in her youth, that she had composed small melodies that she had never dared to show anyone except her sister. I'd love to try, she replied. Her voice choked with emotion. The morning turned into afternoon as Esmeralda met more children, volunteers, and medical staff. Each conversation, each shared story, revealed another facet of the tremendous impact Margaret had had on so many lives. She had not only created a space for physical healing, but a true home where children could still be children, despite their illnesses. During lunch, served in the spacious dining room decorated with murals painted by the patients, Esmeralda observed the cheerful bustle around her. Laughter, conversations, even the occasional childish argument, life in its purest and most resilient expression. How did she do it? She asked in a low voice to Carmen, who was sitting next to her. How did she manage to create something so beautiful while dealing with her own illness? Carmen smiled softly. She used to say that the foundation was her best medicine, that each smile from these children gave her another day of life. She paused, and she always added, "Imagine what Esperanza and I could do together." The words struck Esmeralda deeply. So many lost possibilities, so many years wasted in resentment, and yet, here she was, surrounded by her sister's legacy, with the opportunity to continue it, to expand it, to make it her own as well. When it was time to leave, Hope insisted on playing one last piece for the other Hayes. The children, volunteers, and staff gathered in the main courtyard to listen. As the violin notes rose towards the Hilton Head sky, Esmeralda closed her eyes and for a moment felt that Margaret was there beside her, gently squeezing her hand as she used to when they were children. On the way back to Savannah, with the sun setting behind the hills, Esmeralda made a decision. She would not only keep Margaret's legacy alive, she would expand it, contributing her own talents and vision. The reconciliation that hadn't been possible in life could manifest itself through a shared purpose. "I need to go back to the house," Esmeralda said as they entered Savannah. "There's something I need to do." Back at the Victorian on Jasmine Lane, with Tlaloc faithfully following her, Esmeralda went directly to Margaret's studio. With renewed determination, she took the sketchbook and watercolors that her sister had left for her in the blue trunk. She sat in front of the empty easel, contemplated the blank canvas, and began to paint. She wasn't an experienced artist like Margaret, but she had something to express, something she needed to materialize. As the first brushstrokes of color came to life under her fingers, Esmeralda felt a circle beginning to close. It wasn't the end of the story. Rather, it was the beginning of a new chapter that would honor the past while building an unexpected but promise-filled future. A week after her visit to the Esperanza Foundation, the Victorian on Jasmine Lane buzzed with activity. Carmen had brought her children, Gabriel and Sophia, to spend the weekend, and the silence that once dominated the place had been replaced by lively conversations, music from the old piano recovered from oblivion, and the constant coming and going of youthful steps. Esmeralda watched from the patio as Gabriel helped Carmen plant new flowers in the garden. The boy had not only the eyes of the Hayes family, but also that characteristic determination that had defined generations of his ancestors. He worked methodically, with a concentration that reminded her so much of her father that it was almost painful. From inside the house came the notes of the piano, where Sophia was practicing a piece by Ella Fitzgerald that Margaret had loved. The young girl had inherited the family's musical talent and, according to Carmen, dreamed of studying at the Juilliard School. "Aunt Esmeralda," Gabriel called, using the familiar title he had adopted almost instantly. "Where do you want us to plant the sunflowers?" Esmeralda smiled at the naturalness with which the title flowed from his lips. "Next to the south wall, dear. They'll get more sun there." It was amazing how, in just 7 days, her life had taken such a dramatic turn. From living alone in a small apartment in Atlanta, surrounded by routines and bittersweet memories, she now found herself at the center of a newly discovered family, with plans and projects extending into a future that suddenly seemed full of purpose. The night before, she had finished reading all the letters Margaret had written to her during their years of separation. 86 missives that narrated joys, sorrows, reflections, and above all an unwavering love that had survived silence and distance. The last letter, written just 3 weeks before her passing, contained a sentence that Esmeralda had underlined with trembling hands. "No matter how much time passes, some melodies are destined to be played together again." Tlaloc rubbed against her ankles, reminding her of his constant presence. The cat seemed to have assumed the mission of not leaving her alone for more than a few minutes, as if Margaret had personally entrusted him with this task. "Esmeralda," Carmen called from the garden. "Dr. Evans just called. He says the foundation's papers will be ready to sign on Monday." Esmeralda nodded. After consulting with the notary and the foundation's lawyers, she had decided to formalize her participation in the project started by Margaret. She would not only contribute financially, but would also contribute her experience as a former music teacher to develop a comprehensive therapeutic program. The decision had come after sleepless nights and long conversations with Carmen. The painting she had created in Margaret's studio that first day after visiting Hilton Head had also significantly influenced her, a canvas that now occupied a place of honor in the main living room. It wasn't technically impressive like her sister's works, but it captured something essential: 2 little girls under a jacaranda tree, surrounded by musical notes that transformed into colorful butterflies. It was the visualization of a memory that Margaret and she had shared in their childhood, when they invented songs under the large tree in the family garden. Sophia stopped playing and came out to the patio, her eyes bright with youthful enthusiasm. "Aunt Esmeralda, I found more sheet music in the attic trunk. Some have original compositions. The signature says E.H. Are they yours?" Esmeralda felt a warm blush on her cheeks. "Many years ago, yes. They were composition exercises, nothing serious. "They're beautiful," the young girl exclaimed, "especially jacarandas in autumn. Could you teach me?" "I haven't played it in over 4 decades," Esmeralda admitted, surprised that her niece had unearthed those youthful attempts she thought were lost forever. "It's never too late to start over," Sophia said, unconsciously repeating the words Margaret had written in her note next to the sketchbook. "Besides, I think it would be perfect for the benefit concert." The benefit concert. An idea that had come up during dinner 3 nights ago, when Esmeralda casually mentioned that the foundation needed additional funds for the planned expansion. Sophia had suggested organizing a musical event in Savannah, taking advantage of the network of artists and musicians who frequented the city. What began as a casual suggestion had quickly transformed into a concrete project. Carmen knew several local musicians through her husband, who taught at the art school. Gabriel, with his innate organizational skills, had already designed posters and created a list of potential sponsors. Even Tlaloc seemed to approve of the idea, attentively following the planning conversations as if he understood every word. "Come on, Aunt Esmeralda," Sophia insisted, taking her hand, "just once to see how it sounds." Allowing herself to be dragged to the piano, Esmeralda sat on the bench that had once belonged to her mother. The yellowed sheet music showed notes written in the unsure handwriting of an 18-year-old Esmeralda, full of dreams that she had eventually abandoned for a more practical path. Her fingers touched the keys tentatively, finding the melody almost instinctively. The first notes sounded hesitant, but soon her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten. The composition, inspired by the purplish color of the jacarandas contrasting with the autumn leaves, flowed with a bittersweet nostalgia that perfectly reflected her current emotions. When she finished, the silence in the room was charged with emotion. Carmen and Gabriel had come in to listen, and now all 3 were looking at her with a mixture of amazement and pride. "It's beautiful," Carmen whispered, her eyes shining. Margaret always said she had a sister with the soul of an artist. Esmeralda felt something release within her, a knot of repressed longings, of paths not taken, of denied talents. "I think," she said slowly, "we could include it in the concert program, with a little practice." "Yes," Sophia exclaimed, hugging her impulsively, "and we could do a duet. Me with the violin and you at the piano." The idea of performing publicly after so many decades should have terrified her, but instead, Esmeralda felt a surge of anticipation. It was as if a dormant part of her being finally awakened, stretching towards the light after a long winter. That night, while the young people slept and Carmen organized sheet music in the library, Esmeralda sat in Margaret's studio with a new canvas in front of her. Next to her, on a side table, she had arranged the watercolors her sister had left her, and the sketchbook she had begun to fill with her own ideas. Tlaloc watched from his favorite spot on the windowsill, his silent presence a comfort in the night's quiet. "You know, Tlaloc," Esmeralda said as she mixed shades of blue and violet, "I think Margaret always knew this moment would come. That one day I would be here, rediscovering parts of myself that I had forgotten." The cat blinked slowly, as if agreeing with her words. "I wonder if she suspected that her departure would be what finally brought me back," she continued, applying soft brushstrokes that began to form the silhouette of a jacaranda. "How strange that sometimes we need to lose something to find so much." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The benefit concert, initially conceived as a modest event, had grown into a full-fledged art festival. Several renowned musicians from Savannah had offered their participation, drawn by the story of the Esperanza Foundation. A committee of local society ladies had formed to coordinate logistics, and the garden of the Victorian House would be transformed into an outdoor stage. Esmeralda divided her days between piano practice, visits to Hilton Head to oversee the progress of the foundation's expansion, and hours in the studio painting what she called musical visualizations, interpretations of color and form of the melodies she would play at the concert. These paintings would be auctioned during the event to raise additional funds. One afternoon, while working on one of these works, she received an unexpected visit. Dr. Lucy Miller arrived accompanied by Hope, who had insisted on coming when she heard about the concert. "I want to play Happy Birthday for the party," the little girl announced, with the characteristic determination that had allowed her to overcome her illness. "And I want you to accompany me on the piano, Esmeralda." Moved by the request, Esmeralda agreed to rehearse with her. Soon the notes of the child's violin and the piano, blended into a performance that, while not technically perfect, was brimming with life and emotion. "Play with your heart," Esmeralda commented after finishing. "That's something you can't teach." Margaret said the same thing, the girl replied, carefully adjusting her violin in its case. She said that music isn't in the notes, but in the silence between them. Esmeralda felt a chill run down her spine. It was a phrase her father used to repeat when he gave them piano lessons as children. That Margaret had preserved and transmitted it was a testament to how circles of influence continue to expand long after we think they have closed. The night before the concert, Esmeralda couldn't sleep. She got up quietly and, with Tlaloc following her like a faithful shadow, went to the studio. There, under the silvery moonlight coming through the windows, she contemplated the portrait Margaret had painted of her years ago, a portrait she had accidentally discovered among canvases stored in a closet. In the painting, a younger Esmeralda looked towards an imaginary horizon, her eyes full of unrealized possibilities, her hands resting on an invisible piano. It was how Margaret had always seen her, not as the pragmatic schoolteacher she had become, but as the artist she could have been. "You were right," she whispered to the portrait. "You always knew how to see me better than I saw myself." Motivated by an impulse, she took a blank canvas and began to paint under the moonlight. Not a musical visualization this time, but a portrait of Margaret as she remembered her in her youth. Vibrant, bold, always looking towards the future with unwavering confidence. When dawn began to tint the sky with shades of pink and gold, Esmeralda put the final touches on her painting. It wasn't a technical masterpiece, but it had captured something essential: her sister's indomitable spirit, the inner light that had guided so many lives, including her own. "This will be our final duet," she murmured, signing the bottom corner with her initials intertwined with Margaret's. "A symphony of colors to close our circle." The day of the benefit concert dawned with an intense blue sky, as if the heavens themselves wanted to contribute to the celebration. From early on, the Victorian house became an anthill of activity: volunteers setting up chairs in the garden, musicians tuning instruments, cooks preparing snacks for the attendees. Esmeralda watched the movement from her bedroom window, where she was getting ready with a mixture of nervousness and expectation. She had chosen for the occasion a purple silk dress, Margaret's favorite color, and a silver jacaranda-shaped brooch she had found among her sister's belongings. "You're beautiful," Carmen said, as she entered to help her with her hair. "Margaret would be so proud." "I'm terrified," Esmeralda confessed, with a small laugh. "I haven't performed in public since that school fundraiser in 1985. Fear and excitement are almost indistinguishable," Carmen wisely replied as she adjusted a silver strand of hair. "Both make the heart race." The words carried the echo of Dolores's practical philosophy, reminding her again of the invisible threads that connected her extended family across generations and circumstances. At noon, the guests began to arrive. Savannah's cultural elite mingled with families of Esperanza Foundation patients, creating a unique atmosphere where social differences dissolved before a common purpose. The garden, transformed under Sophia's artistic direction, shone with flower garlands and small lights waiting for sunset to shine. In a discreet but prominent corner, Esmeralda had placed Margaret's portrait along with a selection of her most significant paintings. Each work had a small explanatory plaque telling the story and purpose of the foundation. Next to them, Esmeralda's musical visualizations and the portrait she had painted the night before formed a visual dialogue between the sisters, a testament to a connection that transcended time and circumstances. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gabriel announced through the microphone installed on the makeshift stage, "welcome to the first Esperanza Foundation Benefit Art Festival." Applause echoed as the young man, with surprising confidence for his 16 years, briefly explained the purpose of the event and introduced the distinguished artists who would be participating. When he mentioned that his great-aunt Esmeralda would be performing original compositions, a murmur of anticipation ran through the audience. The first musicians took the stage, a string quartet that performed traditional Mexican pieces with elegance and passion. Then followed a flamenco guitarist who drew ovations with his virtuosity, and a piano duo that presented contemporary arrangements of Manuel M. Ponce. Sitting in the front row next to Carmen and Lucy, Esmeralda felt her nervousness grow as her turn approached. Tlaloc, who had surprisingly adapted well to the bustle, rested at her feet like a reassuring presence. "It's your turn, Esmeralda," one of the organizers whispered after the piano duo received the last applause. With shaky legs but firm determination, Esmeralda went to the piano placed in the center of the stage. The sun was beginning its descent, bathing the garden in a golden light that seemed to bless the moment. "Good afternoon," she said into the microphone, her voice initially hesitant but gaining strength with each word. "The piece I will be playing this afternoon I composed many years ago, when I was just a young girl full of dreams. It's called Jacarandas in Autumn, and it's dedicated to my sister Margaret, who always believed in me, even when I had stopped believing in myself." Her fingers found the keys, and the first notes floated in the air like newly released butterflies. The melody, nostalgic but full of hope, seemed to perfectly capture the spirit of the moment, a lament for what was lost that gradually transformed into a celebration of what was found. As she played, Esmeralda felt as if each note were a conversation with Margaret, an exchange that transcended physical and temporal limitations. When the last note faded into the air, there was a moment of absolute silence before applause erupted. Esmeralda opened her eyes, she hadn't even realized she had closed them, to find moved faces and tear-filled eyes among the audience. But there was no time to dwell on emotion. With a gesture, she invited Hope to join her on stage. The little girl, radiant in a sky-blue dress that matched her flower-decorated wheelchair, came forward with her violin ready. Together, they performed a version of Happy Birthday that drew smiles and tears alike. The contrast between the novice violinist and the experienced pianist, creating a musical texture that spoke of mentoring legacies and knowledge passed down from generation to generation. The culminating moment came when Sophia joined them for the finale, her violin adding a third voice to the musical conversation. Three generations united by art, by a shared purpose, by the invisible threads of family love, both blood and chosen. Sunset gave way to night, and the small lights in the garden lit up, creating a magical atmosphere. The fundraising had exceeded all expectations, ensuring not only the planned expansion of the foundation, but also the creation of an arts scholarship program for children in recovery. Later, when the last guests had left and only the family remained, Esmeralda sat on the garden swing contemplating the stars shining over Savannah. Gabriel and Sophia were chatting animatedly about the details of the event, while Carmen was organizing the donations received. Tlaloc rested on her lap, purring contentedly. "Do you know what day it is?" Carmen asked, approaching with 2 cups of hot chocolate. Esmeralda shook her head, gratefully accepting the warm drink. "Today marks exactly 2 months since you arrived at the house," Carmen explained, sitting down beside her. "Margaret predicted it would take you about 2 months to rebuild your life here. She said you were like the jacarandas. You need time to take root, but once you do, you bloom with incomparable beauty." Esmeralda contemplated the illuminated house, thinking about the unexpected turns her life had taken since that day she stood in front of the gate with the key in her hand. She had not only rediscovered her passion for music and art, but had found a new family, a renewed purpose, and a way to honor her sister's legacy that was simultaneously a tribute and a continuation. "I've decided to stay permanently," she announced, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'll sell the apartment in the city. I want to be close to the foundation, close to you. I want to watch Gabriel and Sophia grow up. I want to help more children like Hope." Carmen's eyes shone with unshed tears. The Victorian house was always too big for one person. Margaret knew that. "I'm not sure I believe in predetermined destinies," Esmeralda mused, absently stroking Tlaloc, "but I do believe in second chances. In the possibility of rewriting our stories, even when we think the book is already closed." In the night sky, a shooting star traced a bright arc, like a brushstroke of light on the dark canvas. Esmeralda smiled, remembering how she and Margaret used to make wishes on the stars during their summers in Hilton Head. "Did you make a wish?" Sophia asked, who had approached quietly and had seen the meteor. "I don't need to," Esmeralda replied, extending an arm to hug her great niece. "I already have everything I could ever want." That night, before going to sleep, Esmeralda opened her sketchbook and began to sketch the outlines of a new project, a mural for the entrance of the foundation that would represent a blooming garden where children of all conditions could find hope, healing, and beauty. In the center of the design, almost like a subtle signature, she drew 2 intertwined jacarandas, their branches extending to embrace the future with promise and possibility. As sleep gradually overcame her, She had the warm and comforting feeling that Margaret would approve of every brushstroke, every note, every decision made in these 2 months of rediscovery. The circle that her sister had begun to draw years ago was finally complete, not as an end, but as the beginning of an upward spiral of purpose and fulfillment. Tlaloc, faithful guardian, settled at her feet as he had every night since her arrival. His amber eyes shone in the semi-darkness, as if containing all the answers of the universe, as if he had known from the beginning that Esmeralda's path would lead her exactly where she needed to be. Outside, the jacarandas swayed gently in the night breeze, their silhouettes cut against the starry sky of Savannah, silent witnesses to transformations, reconciliations, and new beginnings that bloomed in the garden of shared memories. My friends, we've reached the end of the story. Did you enjoy it? What lesson can you take from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. Until next time. 2.